Just wore right out. There's some major damage done to the pulley on the drive motor on this thing, so it's just worn out and it just crumbled, fell to pieces. It's the pulley that the drive belt sits on, which runs the whole thing, so it's gone.
Everyone thought this ground was dead, walked away, written off. But Rick Ness didn't see a lost cause. He saw a question nobody else bothered to ask. Buried beneath decades of dirt and doubt was a forgotten shaft, sealed, collapsed, and erased from the maps. And when Rick decided to open it, he wasn't chasing rumors. He was chasing the one place no one had dared to dig. What came next shocked the entire gold rush world. Because this wasn't a lucky cleanup. It wasn't a fluke. It was a discovery so massive it flipped the season on its head. A gold find estimated at $100 million, hidden in plain sight, while everyone else walked right past it. If you want real gold rush stories that hit before everyone else, smash that like button, subscribe, and stay locked in, because this one changes everything. Rick didn't inherit this claim with excitement. He inherited it with warnings. Old-timers shook their heads when they heard his plan. They told him crews had tried and failed here for years. Equipment broke down for no clear reason. Gold totals never justified the fuel bills. Some miners didn't even make it through a full season before walking away. On paper, this ground was poison. The kind of place you take only if you've run out of options. But Rick wasn't looking at the paperwork. He was looking at the land itself. As soon as he stepped onto the claim, something felt off. The surface cuts told one story, but the terrain told another. He started spotting old survey stakes, half buried in the dirt, markers that didn't line up with any modern maps. Timber fragments stuck out of the ground at odd angles, weathered and blackened with age, clearly placed by hand. These weren't leftovers from recent mining. They were older, much older, and they didn't match the narrative that this place had been fully worked. Then came the discovery that made Rick stop everything. Beneath a tangle of brush and collapsed earth was a depression in the ground that didn't look natural. When the crew cleared it out, they realized what they were staring at: an old shaft entrance, caved in and intentionally buried. This wasn't a random hole. It was a planned access point that someone had gone out of their way to erase. For Rick, that was the moment the entire claim changed. Instead of chasing surface gold like everyone before him, he made a call that could either resurrect his season or end it early. He was going underground. As stripping began, the surprises came fast. Just a few feet down, the excavator bucket caught something solid. Not bedrock, wood. Thick, rotting beams stacked in a way that made no sense for surface support. These timbers were buried far deeper than any shallow operation would justify. As more dirt came away, the structure revealed itself. A reinforced tunnel system, carefully built. Not the chaotic hand-dug shafts typical of early prospectors just chasing color. The deeper they exposed it, the stranger it got. The tunnel walls showed planning, alignment, purpose. This wasn't desperation mining. This was organized, deliberate work by people who knew exactly where they wanted to go. Rick pulled historical claim records, and that's when another red flag appeared. There were gaps, entire years missing from documentation tied to this exact location. Ownership transfers that didn't line up, work records that simply stopped without explanation. What bothered Rick most was the way the shaft had been sealed. The collapse didn't look accidental. Heavy material had been pushed in from above, sealing the entrance like someone wanted to make sure no one ever went back inside. That's when the idea hit him hard. This ground hadn't been abandoned because it was empty. It had been abandoned because it was unfinished. When the crew finally made it safely into the shaft, the past came alive around them. Wedged into the tunnel walls were old tools, pick heads, iron wedges, equipment styles that didn't match the era most miners worked this region. These weren't Klondike rush leftovers. They belonged to an earlier operation, one that modern miners had never accounted for. The tunnel itself angled sharply downward, cutting straight past the gold-bearing layers everyone else focused on at the surface. Rick brought in geological analysis, and the data confirmed what the ground had been hinting at all along. Below the depth, where most operations had stopped, the rock structure changed sharply, sealing off untouched pay zones beneath heavy groundwater pressure layers that early miners simply couldn't break through. They hadn't quit because the gold was gone. They quit because going any deeper meant collapse. That understanding left Rick with only one option. If the answers were buried exactly where the old miners were forced to stop, then that was where the truth had to be pulled from. He ordered core samples drilled straight from the shaft walls, bypassing surface material and loose overburden entirely. The drill bit tore into solid rock, vibrating through timber supports that hadn't been disturbed in decades. When the cores came up, the difference was immediate. Heavier, darker, streaked with dense mineralization. This wasn't runoff or leftovers. This was rock that had never been washed, never processed, never exposed. When the assay results came back, the mood on site shifted instantly. The numbers weren't just better than the surface cuts nearby. They were in a completely different category. Gold content was coming back several times richer than anything pulled from above, and it wasn't spread thin or scattered. The gold was clustered, packed tightly into defined sections of rock, the kind of formation miners dream about but rarely see. This was structure gold, locked into place, preserved and untouched. As more samples were analyzed, a pattern emerged. The concentration wasn't random. It followed a clear line, a trapped vein that ran deeper into the ground, sealed off by geology and time. The realization hit the crew hard. This wasn't a lucky bonus pocket or a short-term boost. This was a system, large, continuous, and potentially massive. The shaft wasn't leading to gold. It was sitting on top of it. That discovery raised an even bigger question. If this much gold was here, why had it been left behind? The answer became clearer the deeper Rick dug into the history and the ground itself. The angle of the tunnel told the story. Early miners simply didn't have the technology to follow it safely. The shaft dipped below a groundwater pressure zone that would have flooded instantly with even minor disturbance. One wrong strike, one weak support, and the entire tunnel would have collapsed. Back then, it wasn't a calculated risk. It was a death sentence. The geology confirmed it. The richest pay zone sat just beneath layers of water-saturated ground that acted like a natural barrier. Early crews may have seen signs of the gold, maybe even hit the edge of it, but without pumps, reinforcement systems, or modern excavation tools, they had no way forward. That's why the shaft was sealed. Not because the gold ran out, but because it became unreachable. Rick's operation changed the equation. Modern pumps kept water pressure under control. Steel reinforcements stabilized walls that would have failed decades earlier. Every step forward was deliberate, slow, and expensive, but it worked. Ground that once meant certain collapse was now accessible. The gold had been waiting, not hiding, simply beyond reach until now. But pushing deeper came at a cost. As excavation resumed, things began to go wrong. Equipment that had been reliable all season started failing without warning. Hydraulics blew out under pressure. Drill heads snapped in solid rock. Pumps clogged repeatedly, forcing emergency shutdowns. Each failure slowed progress and drove costs higher. What should have been routine work turned into a constant battle just to stay operational. Then the ground reminded everyone how fragile the situation really was. Without warning, part of the shaft wall gave way. A partial cave-in thundered through the tunnel, filling sections with debris and forcing an immediate evacuation. Dust filled the air. Supports groaned under fresh weight. For hours, no one knew how bad the damage was, or if the shaft could even be saved. When the dust settled, the reality set in. Repairs would take time, money, and risk. Investors started asking hard questions. Was it worth pouring more resources into a hole that clearly didn't want to stay open? The deeper Rick went, the more dangerous it became. Every dollar spent now came with no guarantees. Rick stood at the center of the decision with no safe option in front of him. Walking away meant abandoning one of the strongest leads he had ever uncovered. Pushing forward meant committing fully to a shaft that could still fail without warning. The pressure stacked up fast, money, machinery, and the ground itself pushing back. But the data was clear. The gold was there, locked just beyond the point where others had been forced to stop. So Rick didn't retreat. He reinforced. Steel supports went in section by section. Backup equipment staged within reach. Safety protocols tightened until every move was deliberate. Progress slowed, but it didn't stall. And when the crew finally pushed past the danger zone, the shaft held. The ground still shifted and groaned, but it stayed intact. That was when the tunnel face changed. Fractured stone and dark sediment gave way to solid quartz, cutting cleanly through the wall. Thick bands formed where none had existed before, carrying visible mineralization. Flecks of gold caught the light, embedded deep in the rock, not loose, not washed down from above. This wasn't runoff or leftovers. This was gold exactly where it had always been, waiting beyond the limit that stopped everyone else. Every few feet forward made the picture clearer. The vein didn't pinch out or fade like a pocket would. It widened. The quartz bands grew heavier, layered with mineral streaks that followed a consistent direction. The deeper they went, the richer it looked. Drill tests confirmed what everyone was starting to believe. The grade was increasing, not dropping. That alone changed everything. Gold like this wasn't accidental. It was structural, locked into a system that had been building for thousands of years. The shaft that had once looked like a dead end now felt like a doorway. The early miners hadn't missed the gold. They had found it and stopped at the threshold. The forgotten shaft wasn't a failed operation. It was an unfinished one. Rick could see it now. The tunnel alignment, the way the supports were originally set, all pointed toward this vein. Whoever dug this had known exactly where they were going and exactly when they had to stop. Once enough material was safely extracted, Rick made the call to run it through the wash plant. This wasn't a full-scale operation yet, just a controlled test to see if the underground reality matched the geological promise. The material hit the plant heavier than anything they'd processed all season. Slurry rolled through the system, and almost immediately, gold began to appear. It didn't trickle in. It flooded. The sluices lit up as dense yellow bands formed across the mats. Gold stacked on gold, thick and heavy, refusing to wash away. Crew members stopped what they were doing and just stared. This wasn't the kind of cleanup where you count flakes or small nuggets. This was weight, real weight. Every shovel from the shaft translated directly into visible returns. As the run continued, the silence grew. No cheering, no shouting, just disbelief as the numbers climbed higher and higher. Weigh-ins passed expectations in minutes, then doubled them, then kept going. This wasn't a good day. It was the kind of run that redefined a season in a single afternoon. Rick watched the final weigh out, knowing exactly what it meant. One controlled run from a fraction of the shaft had delivered more gold than weeks of surface mining. And this wasn't the heart of the vein yet. This was the edge. The shaft hadn't even reached its deepest point. That reality hit harder than the gold itself. If this much value was coming from an early test, the scale of what lay below was almost difficult to process. Rick brought in independent geologists, not just to confirm the grade, but to map the system properly. They studied the shaft, the quartz formations, the surrounding rock layers, and the direction of the vein's growth. Their findings changed the conversation entirely. The vein didn't stop at the shaft wall. It extended laterally and downward, branching into structures that suggested long-term continuity. This wasn't an isolated feature. It was part of a broader system embedded deep beneath the claim. Conservative modeling, intentionally cautious, put the potential value near the $100 million mark, and that was without assuming maximum recovery. The forgotten shaft stopped being a liability the moment it proved it could deliver consistently. What began as a gamble on abandoned ground quickly reshaped Rick's entire operation. Planning shifted overnight. Equipment schedules were rewritten. Short-term survival gave way to long-term strategy as every run confirmed the same truth. The gold wasn't scattered across the claim. It was concentrated, protected, and still unfolding. As the numbers kept stacking up, attention followed. Not through announcements or press, but through quiet recalculations across the Klondike. Rick's results made it impossible to ignore what was happening underground. Miners, who had once walked away from similar ground, began pulling out old maps, rechecking past cuts, and questioning decisions they thought were final. Abandoned claims stopped looking like failures and started looking unfinished. Ground that had carried no value suddenly carried pressure. Interest grew. Boundaries tightened. Competition returned to places everyone thought were settled. Rick Ness wasn't just producing gold. He was forcing the entire region to look at the past differently. Claims that had sat untouched became contested almost overnight. Lease prices climbed. Boundaries were argued. Old handshake agreements were suddenly revisited with lawyers and paperwork. Everyone wanted to know if they had walked away too soon from something valuable. The ripple effect was immediate and undeniable. Rick Ness had changed the rules without meaning to, simply by proving that the past hadn't been fully explored. Rick's discovery forced miners to confront that reality. Fortunes weren't necessarily lost. They were paused, waiting for someone willing to push past where others stopped. The ground hadn't changed. The tools had. The mindset had. The shaft kept producing. And with it came a growing understanding that this wasn't an isolated event. It was a signal. Beneath familiar land, beneath ignored ground, there were systems still intact, untouched, and ready to be uncovered. Rick Ness had simply been the one to listen when the ground told a different story.